There was a pot on the stove every single day in the house I grew up in. Not because we were rich, not because we had a pantry full of groceries delivered twice a week. Because my grandmother, and I mean every grandmother in every house on that block, knew something that has been all but forgotten now. She knew that an empty pantry was not the end of dinner. It was the beginning of a question. And the question was, what do we have? Not what do we wish we had. Not what the people 2 streets over might be eating tonight. What do we have right here, right now, in this kitchen, with these hands and this fire? And family, the answer she came up with could feed 6 people for 3 days running. I am talking about meals that looked like nothing from the outside and tasted like everything once you sat down. I am talking about a pot of something that started on Monday and was better by Wednesday. I am talking about the kind of cooking where nothing got wasted. Not the bone, not the pot liquor, not the heel of the bread, not the grease in the pan. Everything had a second life. Everything had a purpose. And the woman standing at that stove knew exactly what that purpose was. We did not call it budget cooking. We did not call it meal planning. We did not put it on a blog or film it for a cooking channel. We just called it dinner. We called it Tuesday. We called it what Big Mama made because there was no other option and no other option was needed. There is a generation coming up now that has never known what it means to make something out of almost nothing. And I don't say that as a criticism. I say it as a call. Because what those women built in those kitchens, with those few dollars and those stubborn ingredients, was not just food. It was a masterclass in dignity, in resourcefulness, in the kind of love that doesn't wait until it has everything it needs. It works with what's there. Today, family, we're going back to those kitchens. We are going back to the meals that stretched $1 so far you could see daylight through it. 21 of them. Every one of them real. Every one of them earned. Hey family, I'm James, and welcome back to Forgotten Black Memories, the place where we keep these stories alive week after week because somebody has to. If this is your first time here, do me a favor right now before we go any further. Hit that subscribe button down below. Tap that bell so you don't miss a single video. We are building something here. A community of people who remember and people who want to remember. And I am glad you found us. Now let's get into it. Now before I start calling these meals by name, I want you to understand the world they came out of. Because these were not recipes born in a cooking school. They were not developed in a test kitchen. They came out of necessity. Pure, real necessity. We are talking about the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. We are talking about black families in the South and up through the cities of the North, Chicago, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, where work was hard and wages were harder. A man might bring home $12 for a week's labor. A woman might take in washing for $3, and they had to feed children off of that. They had to keep the lights on. They had to put something on the table every single night, 7 days a week without fail, because children do not stop being hungry because the money ran out on Thursday. So these meals I'm about to share with you, they are organized the way Big Mama thought about cooking, not by the calendar, by the strategy, by the wisdom underneath the cooking. There were meals built around stretching a little bit of meat into something enormous. There were meals that started with what most people were going to throw away. There were meals that came straight up from the garden, with nothing extra needed. There were meals that lived in a pot all week long, getting better every day. And there were the sweet somethings, the desserts and the drinks and the little bits of joy that Big Mama managed to make out of almost nothing, because she understood that the body needs sugar the same way it needs salt. You need something sweet to remind you that life is not all hardship. That is how we are walking through this today. 5 clusters, 21 meals. Every single one of them real. Let us start at the beginning. Let us start with the meat. Number 1, neck bones and rice. If you did not grow up eating neck bones, family, I need you to lean in close, because I am about to tell you something that might change how you think about what a meal is supposed to be. A pound of neck bones cost almost nothing. Back in the 1950s, you could get them from the butcher for a few cents a pound because the people who ran the grocery stores, and I mean the stores that black families were often directed away from, they did not think the neck was worth much. They thought it was scrap. They thought it was the part you used for stock if you used it at all. Big Mama thought differently. She would put those neck bones in a pot with water and an onion and a bay leaf and a pinch of red pepper flakes, and she would let them go low and slow for 3 or 4 hours. And what happened in that pot was nothing short of a miracle. The bones gave up everything they had. The collagen dissolved into the broth and turned it into something rich and thick and deep. The little knuckles of meat that clung to those bones became tender enough to fall away at the touch of a finger. Then she made white rice, plain, long grain, salted, and she ladled those neck bones and that pot liquor right over the top of it. A bowl of that cost almost nothing to make, but it could feed the whole family, and the broth that was left in the pot, that did not get thrown away. That went into the cornbread batter. That went into the greens. Nothing stopped giving until it had nothing left to give. That was just how it was done. Number 2. Salt pork and beans. Now I want you to understand what salt pork was in the context of a household that did not have money to spare. Salt pork was not a protein source. It was a flavoring agent that also happened to have protein in it. It was a thick piece of cured pork belly, heavy on the salt, heavy on the fat, that cost almost nothing, but could transform a pot of dry beans into something that tasted like it had been cooking in a restaurant kitchen all day. You would soak your dried navy beans or pinto beans overnight in water. In the morning, you would drain them and put them in a fresh pot with a piece of salt pork about the size of your palm, a halved onion, a clove of garlic, black pepper, and just enough water to cover everything generously. Then you walked away. You went to work. You went to church. You came home hours later and that kitchen smelled like something holy. The fat from the salt pork had rendered out and coated every single bean. The salt had seasoned the broth from the inside. The beans had swelled up and gone creamy, and the whole pot had thickened into something that was not quite a soup and not quite a stew, but was exactly what was needed. You served it over cornbread, or with a piece of it on the side to soak up the broth, and a pot of beans that cost maybe 30 cents at most could feed a family of 5 with leftovers for the next day. Now, Big Mama used to say dry beans are a poor man's steak, and she was not wrong. She was not wrong at all. Number 3, chicken feet stew. I know some of you just flinched. Stay with me. Chicken feet were among the cheapest things you could buy at the butcher in the 1950s and 1960s. They were considered waste by many people outside the black community and certain immigrant communities who knew better. You could buy a whole bag of them for almost nothing, and what Big Mama could do with a bag of chicken feet was a lesson in patience and purpose. First, she would clean them carefully, scalding them in hot water, removing the outer skin, trimming the nails. This took time. It was not a shortcut kind of ingredient. But the reward was a stew that had a body to it you could not get any other way. Chicken feet are full of collagen. When they cook down slowly in water with onion and garlic and a few stalks of celery and whatever root vegetables you had on hand, carrot, turnip, sweet potato, the broth they produce is thick and silky and deeply savory in a way that a store-bought stock could not imitate. The meat that comes off a chicken foot is not much, but it is flavorful, and the broth is the real treasure. Served over white rice or with a piece of bread to sop it up, a pot of chicken feet stew was a complete meal. It cost almost nothing. It took time and skill. And that skill, knowing how to draw flavor and nutrition out of something that most people dismissed, that was a form of intelligence, a form of wealth that had nothing to do with money. Number 4, ham hock and cabbage. The ham hock was the ankle joint of the pig. It had a little meat on it. More importantly, it had bone and fat and skin, and when you put a ham hock into a pot with something, anything, it made that something taste like it had been kissed by something magnificent. Big Mama's method was simple. She would take a head of cabbage, one of the cheapest vegetables at any market, and she would cut it into large wedges. She would put the ham hock in a pot with water, let it come to a boil, skim the foam, then add the cabbage and a whole onion and a few pinches of black pepper and a spoonful of apple cider vinegar if she had it. Then low heat. Long time. What came out of that pot was cabbage that had absorbed all of the smokiness and salt of the ham hock and had gone completely soft and yielding, nothing like the raw cabbage it started out as. And the meat that fell off the hock, small pieces, sweet and smoky, got mixed right back in. You served it in a bowl with the pot liquor poured over it and a piece of cornbread on the side. One ham hock, one head of cabbage, a pot of water and some seasoning. That was dinner for 5 people, maybe 6. And if there was anything left over, it went back in the pot and got better the next day. Child, let me tell you something. That right there is genius dressed up as a Tuesday meal. Number 5. Pot liquor soup. Now here is where things get really interesting, because this is not a meal that started with an ingredient you bought. It is a meal that started with what was left after you cooked something else. Pot liquor, spelled P-O-T and then L-I-K-K-E-R, and yes, they meant liquor, because you wanted to lick the pot, is the liquid that remains in the pot after you have cooked your collard greens, or your mustard greens, or your turnip greens. It is dark green and deeply seasoned. It has absorbed the salt pork or the ham hock you cooked the greens with. It has the minerals and the flavor of the greens themselves. And most people, after they had served their greens, would have that liquid left in the bottom of the pot. Big Mama did not pour that out. She added to it. She would add a cup or 2 of dried beans, maybe some chopped onion, maybe a piece of salt pork if she had a small one left over. She would let it all simmer together, and she would make cornbread dumplings, just cornmeal and a little water and salt, dropped by spoonfuls into the simmering pot, and she would make pot liquor soup. It cost almost nothing because the main ingredient was something that other households might have thrown away. But it was one of the most nutritious meals in the house, because pot liquor is loaded with iron and vitamins that cooked out of the greens and went right into that liquid. And it was warm and thick and comforting in the way that only something that started as a byproduct of something else can be. Waste nothing. That was the rule. Waste nothing. Number 6. Bread pudding made from stale cornbread. Now we are not in dessert territory yet. I am saving the sweet cluster for later. But bread pudding in the original sense of the term was not a dessert in every black household. It was a practical answer to a practical question. What do you do with cornbread that has gotten too hard to eat? You did not throw it away, that is certain. You crumbled it into a baking dish. You poured a mixture of whatever milk you had, sometimes canned evaporated milk, sometimes sweet milk, sometimes a combination, over the crumbled cornbread and let it soak in. You added eggs if you had them, a little salt, a little black pepper, maybe some chopped onion and a handful of whatever green you had around, and you baked it in the oven until it set up firm. What came out was almost like a savory corn pudding, a custard, something that could be served alongside whatever else was on the table as a starch, or eaten on its own with a cup of something hot. Nothing wasted. The stale bread became a new meal. The crumbs became structure. The liquid became filling. And you fed the family something warm and substantial out of what would have been trash in another kind of kitchen. Big Mama called this common sense. I call it genius. The difference between those two things might be smaller than you think. Number 7. Crackling cornbread. Now here is a meal that came directly out of another process, the rendering of lard. When Big Mama made her own lard, which many women in rural black households did up through the 1960s, she would melt down pieces of pig fat in a heavy pot. The fat rendered out into clear liquid. But the solid bits that remained, the small, crisp, golden pieces of pork skin and connective tissue that would not melt no matter how long they cooked, those were cracklings. And they were not scraps. They were a treasure. She would stir those cracklings into her cornbread batter. She would pour that batter into the hot, greased cast-iron skillet and slide it into the oven. And what came out was a cornbread that had little crispy, salty, porky bits studded throughout it that gave you texture and flavor in every bite. Crackling cornbread could be a side dish. It could be a meal in itself with a cup of buttermilk for dipping. It could be crumbled into a glass of milk and eaten like cereal. In parts of the Deep South in the 1950s, men would take it to work wrapped in newspaper as their entire lunch. It cost almost nothing beyond the time it took to make it, and it tasted like it had been engineered specifically to make you feel all right about the world. Because that is what Big Mama was always doing. Not just feeding the body, giving the spirit something to hold on to. Number 8. Oxtail stew. There was a time, and I need you to understand this because the world has changed so much it almost does not seem real, when oxtail was cheap. When it was considered the part of the cow that nobody serious wanted to bother with. This was before the food world discovered it. Before restaurants in big cities started charging $40 for a plate of braised oxtail and calling it rustic European cuisine. Back in the 1950s and into the 1960s, in black neighborhoods across the South and the cities of the North, you could get oxtail from the butcher for almost nothing, because the butcher knew who was buying it, the families who could not afford the steak, the roast, the chops, and he priced accordingly. Big Mama would brown those oxtail pieces in a heavy pot until they were dark and caramelized on all sides. Then she would add onion, garlic, fresh thyme, a couple of bay leaves, a can of crushed tomatoes or a few fresh ones, potatoes, whatever root vegetables she had, and water or a little bit of whatever broth was in the house. She would cover it and let it go for 4 hours, sometimes 5. What happened over those hours was the complete transformation of something that the market sold as an afterthought into something so deeply flavored, so tender, so richly thick-sauced, that you could not believe it came from the cheap end of the butcher case. The collagen from the bones and the cartilage had completely dissolved into the braising liquid and made it glossy and unctuous. The meat fell off the bone at the press of a fork. You served it over white rice, and it was one of the finest things a person could eat. The world has since caught on. Now oxtail costs more than the steak. But the people who were there first, the women who knew, who have always known, they deserve the credit for understanding what that cut could become. Now, family, let me pause right here for just a second. You have been with me through 8 of these meals, and every single one of them came from a place of knowing how to see possibility where other people saw nothing. That knowledge, that is something worth holding on to. Before we keep going, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was the one meal that your grandmother or your mother made out of almost nothing that your whole family still talks about? What is the dish that seemed like it shouldn't have been special but absolutely was? Tell me. Tell me what it was and where it came from. I read every single comment, every single one, and I want to know. Number 9. Field peas and fatback. There was a garden behind almost every black household in the rural South. Not because it was a lifestyle choice, because it was survival. The garden was where you supplemented what little money could buy. It was where you grew the things that could not be afforded or that were unavailable at the stores that would actually serve you. Field peas, black-eyed peas, purple hull peas, Crowder peas, whippoorwill peas, these grew easily in the southern heat. You planted them in the spring, and by late summer you had more peas than a household could eat fresh, so you shelled them and dried them for winter. And then all year long, you had a protein source that cost nothing but the labor of the garden. The preparation was elemental. You soaked the dried peas. You cooked them low with a piece of fatback, which was salt-cured belly fat, even cheaper and saltier than salt pork, and an onion and some black pepper. The fat seasoned the peas from within. The peas thickened the broth around themselves. You served them over rice or with cornbread. But field peas with fatback in a household that grew its own peas represented a meal that cost almost nothing beyond the soil and the seed and the time. It was as close to free as dinner gets. And it was good. It was hearty and filling, and it kept a man going through a full day of field work, or a full day at the plant, or a full day of whatever labor life was asking for that particular Tuesday. Back in those days, a garden was not a hobby. It was a savings account you could eat. Number 10. Fried green tomatoes. Now, some people today think of fried green tomatoes as a novelty, a southern restaurant thing, an appetizer at a place with exposed brick and a cocktail menu. And I have to tell you, that version has almost nothing to do with what this meal meant in a black household in 1955. Green tomatoes, tomatoes that had not yet ripened, were something you had in abundance in late summer and early fall. Every garden had them at the end of the season. When the first cold snap was coming and the plants still had tomatoes on them that had not had time to turn red, you picked every single one of them, because leaving them on the vine was waste. And waste was not an option. You sliced them. You seasoned them with salt and black pepper. You dredged them in a mixture of cornmeal and a little flour, and you fried them in the same cast-iron skillet with the same rendered lard that cooked everything else in that kitchen. The result was a crust that was crisp and golden, and a center that was firm and tart and slightly tangy in a way that a ripe tomato never was. Served with a sprinkle of extra salt and maybe a splash of hot sauce from the bottle on the counter, fried green tomatoes were a side dish or a light supper that cost nothing. They came from the garden. They went into the cast iron. They came out something worth eating on their own, and they saved the tail end of the garden season from going to waste. Every last green tomato accounted for. Every last one. Number 11. Poke salad. Now here is one that has mostly disappeared, and I want to bring it back, because it represents something important about the knowledge that black women carried that is not written down anywhere you can easily find it. Poke is a wild plant, pokeweed, that grows abundantly throughout the South. It comes up in fields, along fence lines, at the edges of gardens, in the spaces between things where nobody planted anything. To someone who does not know what they are looking at, it is just a weed. To Big Mama, it was a green. The preparation of poke salad required knowledge. The plant contains compounds that are toxic if not properly prepared. You could not simply pick the leaves and eat them raw. You had to know to parboil them, cook them in boiling water, drain the water, add fresh water, and boil again, sometimes a third time, until the bitterness and the harmful compounds had been drawn out and the leaves had gone tender and safe. Then you would fry the parboiled greens in a skillet with bacon grease and a sliced onion until they were wilted and glossy and deeply flavorful. Sometimes you added a scrambled egg to the pan at the end. You served them with cornbread or over white rice. Poke salad cost nothing. It grew wild. But cooking it correctly required knowledge passed down from mother to daughter to granddaughter. That knowledge was valuable. That knowledge kept people fed and safe at the same time. Child, let me tell you something. Knowing what you can eat for free and how to prepare it safely, that is a form of literacy that we have lost in most American households, and it is a loss that we have not yet fully reckoned with. Number 12. Sweet potato everything. I cannot give you a single meal here because sweet potatoes were not a single meal in a black Southern household. They were a philosophy. They were a strategy. They were the one ingredient that could be a breakfast, a lunch, a dinner, a side dish, or a dessert depending on what you did with them and what else you had on hand. You grew them in the garden. They stored well through the winter in a cool, dry place. A root cellar, a corner of the back porch, a box of sand in the shed. And you used them constantly because they were sweet and filling and versatile in a way that almost no other vegetable was. Roasted in the coals of the fireplace in their skins. A complete breakfast. Boiled and mashed with a little butter and salt. A side dish. Cut into pieces and added to a pot of any kind of stew or beans. A thickener and a sweetness. Fried in slices in cast iron until they caramelized on the outside, a side that tasted like dessert. And then, of course, baked into a pie with a little cinnamon and nutmeg and canned evaporated milk. The sweetness at the end of a Sunday meal. One bushel of sweet potatoes from the garden could feed a family across weeks. They required almost no preparation for some preparations and rewarded care in others. They were filling in the way that leafy greens were not. They gave energy. And Big Mama never had just one way to cook them. She had a dozen. And she chose based on what else was in the kitchen and what the family needed that particular day. That is not a recipe. That is a way of thinking. That is the education I am trying to pass along today. Number 13. Big pot of beans that lasted 3 days. Now we have visited beans a couple of times already in this video, and I am going to visit them one more time because I want to talk specifically about the long game. Because what Big Mama understood about dried beans was not just how to cook them for a single meal. It was how to manage them across time. A large pot of pinto beans, a 3-pound bag, seasoned with whatever pork product was available, an onion, garlic, and black pepper, would take most of a day to cook properly. But what it produced was enough food for 3 days for a family of 5 or 6. And critically, those beans did not get worse over 3 days. They got better. Day 1, beans and cornbread. The beans were at their most distinct, individual beans in a savory broth. Day 2, the beans went back on the stove with a little water added. They cooked down further. Some of them broke open and thickened the broth. By now, they were less a separate bean in a soup and more a thick, creamy stew. You served this over white rice. Day 3. What was left of the beans went into a skillet with some bacon grease. You fried them, mashing them as you stirred, until you had something very close to what Mexican kitchens call refried beans, but what Big Mama called fried pinto beans. Crispy at the edges, creamy in the middle, served with cornbread or spread on a piece of toast. 1 pot, 3 meals, 3 different experiences of the same ingredient. The math of that, the economy of that, is something that most modern households simply do not think about anymore. Folks don't do this anymore, and that's a shame. Number 14, Monday's soup pot. In the rhythm of a black household in the 1940s and 1950s, Monday was wash day. This is important to understand, because wash day meant a woman was going to be outside or at the washboard from early morning until afternoon, working physically demanding labor. She did not have time to stand at the stove and cook a complex meal from scratch. So, on Sunday evening, after Sunday dinner was finished and the plates were washed, Big Mama would put a pot on the back of the stove and she would fill it with everything. The leftover chicken carcass from Sunday's fried chicken, stripped to the bone. The pot liquor from the greens. The remaining corn cut from the cob. Whatever pieces of vegetable were left from the Sunday dinner preparation. A little bit of whatever beans or rice were left over. Water. Seasoning. This pot would go on low heat, genuinely low, barely a simmer, overnight, and all of Monday morning. By Monday noon, when the wash was done and the back ached and the hunger was real, there was a soup in that pot that was unlike anything you could have planned at the start. It had no recipe. It had no name. It was Monday's soup. It was the accumulation of Sunday's abundance transformed into Monday's necessity, and it was deeply, deeply satisfying. Because it was made from real things, from things that had already given one meal and were willing to give another, from the kind of thoroughness that cannot be purchased, only practiced. My granddaddy worked 6 days a week and never once complained. He came in on Monday afternoon and sat down and ate 2 bowls of Monday's soup, and he was ready for whatever Tuesday was going to ask of him. That is what a meal can do when it is made with that kind of purpose. Number 15, ham bone soup. After the holiday ham, and in black households, a ham was a holiday, not an everyday thing. After that ham had been sliced and served, and the last of the meat had been picked off, what remained was the bone. A large ham bone with a good amount of meat still clinging in the crevices, and all of that collagen, all of that smoked flavor locked into the marrow. That bone did not go in the trash. That bone went into the biggest pot in the kitchen with water and whatever vegetables were in the house. An onion, a couple of potatoes cut into chunks, dried beans that had been soaking since the night before, a stalk of celery, whatever greens were available, salt, pepper, a bay leaf. The bone would simmer in that pot for most of a day. By the time it was done, the broth was the color of dark amber and tasted like smoke and salt and pork in a way that was impossible to replicate with any modern shortcut. The beans had absorbed all of it. The potatoes had softened and helped thicken the broth. The little bits of ham meat that finally released from the bone were scattered throughout the pot like gifts. 1 ham bone made a soup that could feed a family for 2 full days. And it cost nothing. The ham had already been purchased for the holiday. The bone was what most people today would throw away in the first 30 minutes after carving. What Big Mama saw in that bone was not what was left over. It was what was still possible. Number 16, stewed tomatoes and rice. Now here is a meal that was genuinely simple, almost shockingly simple, and that is exactly why it belongs on this list. Because simplicity, when it is done right, is its own form of abundance. Stewed tomatoes were made in two ways depending on the season. In summer, you used fresh tomatoes from the garden, blanched to remove the skins, then crushed and cooked down with butter or bacon grease, a little sugar to cut the acidity, salt, pepper, and sometimes a pinch of dried basil if you had it. In winter, you used canned tomatoes, which were affordable and which had been preserved at the peak of summer ripeness. You cooked the tomatoes down until they were thick and jammy and deeply concentrated. Then you served this over white rice. That was the whole meal. Stewed tomatoes over white rice, maybe with a piece of cornbread on the side. And it was satisfying in the way that simple things are satisfying when they are made with care. The sweetness of the cooked tomatoes against the neutral starch of the rice. The little bit of fat from the bacon grease or the butter adding richness. The warmth of it filling the stomach completely. This was not a meal that pretended to be more than it was. It was honest. It knew what it was, and it was that thing fully. And a pot of it cost maybe 15 cents in 1955 and could feed 4 people. The whole block would smell it cooking on a summer evening. Not a strong smell. A gentle one. The smell of something being done right with what was available. Number 17. Leftover bread as a meal. I want to spend a moment on this because it represents the bottom of the economy, the place where there was almost nothing left at all, and what Big Mama did when she arrived at that place. Stale bread, white sandwich bread that had gone hard, or biscuits from 2 days ago, or cornbread from the morning, got revived in one of several ways that turned it back into something worth eating. The simplest was milk toast. You took slices of stale white bread and you toasted them until they were dry and crisp. Then you poured hot milk over them, sweetened with a little sugar or a drizzle of cane syrup, or savory with a pinch of salt and butter, and you let the bread absorb the milk until it softened back into something warm and porridge-like. This was served to children for breakfast and to sick family members who needed something gentle. Another method was egg toast, which you know today as French toast, where you dip the stale bread in beaten egg with a little milk and a pinch of salt, and fried it in the cast-iron skillet until it was golden on both sides. A sprinkle of sugar and cinnamon if you had them. If you did not have them, you did not have them, and it was good anyway. The bread was never wasted. Never. Whatever form it needed to take to become a meal again, Big Mama would find that form. Because bread was paid for with money that was earned with labor, and that relationship between the work and the food made every crumb accountable. Number 18, sugar syrup biscuits. Now we move into the last part of what I want to share with you today, and this section is about sweetness. Because what I said at the beginning stands. Big Mama understood that the spirit needs sweetness the same way the body needs salt. And she knew how to make something sweet out of nearly nothing. Sugar syrup biscuits were a breakfast that required exactly 3 things beyond the biscuit itself: water, sugar, and a cast-iron skillet. You made your biscuits from scratch, which Big Mama could do in her sleep, flour and baking powder and lard and buttermilk, cut out and baked in the oven. While the biscuits were in the oven, you put the cast-iron skillet on the stove over medium heat. You added water, maybe a 1/4 cup, and a generous amount of white sugar. You let this cook, stirring, until the sugar dissolved and the mixture began to thicken slightly into a syrup. Sometimes you added a piece of butter. Sometimes you did not. When the biscuits came out, you split them and poured that warm sugar syrup over the inside. The syrup soaked into the hot bread and made the crumbs sweet and sticky. It was not maple syrup. It was not honey. It was sugar dissolved in water, and it was enough. It was a Sunday morning sweetness that cost almost nothing and made children feel like the day was going to be good. We didn't have much, but we had everything that mattered. And this right here is a perfect example of what that means. Number 19, sweet potato pie. Now here we arrive at something that has managed to survive, something that the culture held on to tightly enough that it has never fully disappeared. And I want to take a moment to explain why this pie was made so often, even in houses that could barely afford the ingredients. Because the ingredients were almost entirely things that could be grown or that were very cheap to buy. Sweet potatoes from the garden, eggs from the chickens in the yard, canned evaporated milk, which was shelf-stable and affordable and available in any store. A little bit of butter, sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, vanilla if you had it, and a pie crust made from flour and lard and a pinch of salt. That is it. There is nothing in a sweet potato pie that required wealth to obtain. It was a pie that anyone could make if they had a garden and a few pantry staples. And yet what comes out of the oven is one of the most refined and complex desserts in the American culinary tradition. It is custard, it is spiced, it is deeply sweet, but not cloyingly so. It is the kind of thing that makes a person close their eyes on the first bite. Big Mama made it for Thanksgiving. She made it for Christmas. She made it for no particular reason on a Saturday in October when the sweet potatoes were ready and the afternoon was slow. She made it for church suppers where there were 12 other desserts on the table and people still went straight for hers. You won't see that today. Not that level of skill applied to something made from almost nothing. But it existed. It was real. And every slice of it was worth more than it cost. Number 20. Fried apple hand pies. If you grew up near apple country, and parts of the Black South were close enough to apple-growing regions that bushels of apples came through in the fall at very low prices, then you know these. The apple filling was simple. You peeled and sliced whatever apples you had, not a premium apple, whatever was available, whatever was soft or slightly past peak, and you cooked them down in a pan with a little bit of sugar and cinnamon, and a splash of water until they were completely soft and jammy. You could make a large batch of this filling, and it would keep for several days. Then you made a simple dough, flour, lard, a pinch of salt, enough cold water to bring it together, and you rolled it out thin and cut it into circles. You put a spoonful of the apple filling in the center of each circle, folded the dough over into a half-moon shape, and pinched the edges together tight with a fork. Then you fried them. In lard, or in whatever fat you were using for everything else. They fried golden in a matter of minutes, the outside becoming crisp and slightly puffed, and the inside turning to steam-soft cooked apple. You sprinkled them with a little sugar while they were still hot from the fat. And you ate them standing up at the stove if you could not wait, or sitting at the table if you had a little more patience. A dozen hand pies from a bushel of cheap apples, food for days, sweetness when the season gave it, and nothing wasted, not the soft apple, not the scraps of dough, nothing. Number 21. Cane syrup cake. And here, family, is where I am going to leave you. Not with something sad, not with something heavy, with sweetness, with something that a woman made out of almost nothing and turned into something that her family remembered for the rest of their lives. Cane syrup, not molasses, not maple, but the raw, dark, thick syrup that came from sugarcane processing, was available in the South for almost nothing. It came in tins at the general store. It sweetened everything from biscuits to coffee to sweet potatoes. And in the hands of a woman who knew what she was doing, it became the backbone of a cake. The cane syrup cake had no refined white sugar in it. It did not need any. The syrup provided all the sweetness and more, a deep, complex sweetness with a slight bitterness underneath it, the way that real flavor always has something underneath it. You mixed that syrup with flour and lard and eggs and baking soda and a little buttermilk, and you poured it into whatever baking pan was in the house, and you baked it until the whole kitchen smelled like something that was worth every minute it took. The cake came out dark, dense, moist in a way that kept it good for days, which was important when a cake was meant to last the week and not just the evening. It had no frosting. It did not need any. Big Mama might dust it with a little powdered sugar if she had any. Or she served it as it was, cut into squares, with a glass of cold buttermilk on the side. And that was the end of the week. That was the sweetness that closed it. Made from a tin of syrup that cost a few cents. Made with hands that knew what they were doing and had been doing it for decades. Made for people who were loved. That was just how it was done. Family, I have taken you through 21 meals today. 21 ways that black women in this country looked at almost nothing and made something that fed and sustained and comforted entire families. 5 clusters, 5 different strategies, and underneath all of them the same understanding. that what you have is enough if you know what to do with it. That knowledge is rare now. We live in a time when food is abundant, and the knowledge of how to do without is disappearing. And there is a part of me that worries about what happens when the knowledge disappears before the need for it does. But more than the worry, I have the pride. The immense, humbling pride of knowing that the women who cooked these meals were not defeated by what they did not have. They were made larger by it. They became more creative, more resourceful, more skilled, more generous, not in spite of the poverty, but because of what they chose to do in the face of it. They chose to feed their family every single day, without fail, without complaint, without letting one crumb of anything go to waste. That is the legacy. That is what I want you to carry out of this kitchen today. The next time you are in your kitchen and you feel like you do not have enough, look again. Look the way Big Mama looked. Look at what you have, not at what you are missing, and see what you can make. Share this video with somebody in your family who still carries those old cooking instincts, the one who cannot throw away a bone, the one who always saves the pot liquor, the one who knows what to do with a sweet potato at any stage of its life. This video might give them language for something they have always known. Subscribe, because next time we are going somewhere just as real as today, and I do not want you to miss it. I'll see you next time, family.